Welcome everybody to my Doombringer guide. It's still an excellent weapon for PvP and still a good weapon for PvE. So without further ado, let's get right into it. As per usual tradition, let's take a look at how the weapon works in order to understand how to build it. So, when reading the weapon features, 30% chance to trigger the bullseye when hitting the enemy. This chance is raised to 80% upon hitting an enemy within 5 meters. So your goal is to, stand as close as what you're shooting. Defeating a marked enemy grants attack plus 6 for 60 seconds, up to 5 stacks. So this is a nice 30% attack buff. Then after triggering the bullseye, damage reduction plus 5% for 8 seconds, up to 4 stacks. And lastly, crit rate plus 30% when hitting marked enemies. So now with that in mind, let's take a look at what the bullseye is. So bullseye, really easy. It's a continuous debuff. Highlight marked enemies, which pretty much when you apply the bullseye to an enemy, it will be highlighted, and highlighted marked targets will be outlined and suffer from vulnerability plus 8% for 12 seconds. So they'll just essentially take 8% more damage. Now let's move on to the calibration attributes. So for the main effect, because of the reload speed nerf, I find more success with heavy calibration instead of lightweight, so we're gonna go with heavy. Then for your calibration substats, you could choose to go double crit, double weak spot, or a mix of both. Although I personally would recommend to go double crit rate, as you'd want to do a crit build in terms of substats for this gun. And the reason for that is because crit damage and weak spot are both additive with each other, meaning there is no diminishing return if you keep building crit damage to oblivion instead of weak spot damage. And that essentially means crit damage will be better than weak spot damage if you're going to be using the Doombringer more than your secondary weapon, which I'm going to spoil now, is the bingo. However, if you're going to DPS with the bingo as well, then you might want to sacrifice some of your crit damage substats from mods and get weak spot damage bonus instead, so that your mods substats benefit 2 weapons instead of 1. Now for the accessories, this is so straightforward. It's going to be tactical laser sight for as much accuracy and aiming speed possible. Moving on to your secondary weapon and melee, your preferred secondary option should be the bingo, especially for PvP, as it allows you to have more range than if you go the other option, which would be the wildfire. And another reason for that is because if you opt for the wildfire, you're still kind of stuck in the same range category, which is why bingo is superior. Now for PvE, if you don't have those two options, it's not that bad, as you can make use of the crossbow. But just note that the first 2 options will be superior due to giving better buffs in total and being easier and more convenient to use. Then for your melee weapon, it comes to no one's surprises that it's going to be the long axe for the fortress warfare buffs. And also the crit rate if you hit enemies with the heavy target. So essentially for the long axe, if you still don't know, if I do the long animation with the long axe with as a heavy attack, I hit this enemy. And as you can see right here, Light Strike Double Storm Boost, crit rate increased. Now, this buff can also be gotten, not this buff, the crit rate buff, but the Fortress Warfare buff can be gotten pretty easily just by doing an animation cancel by either rolling after or swapping weapons. So if I can just demonstrate right here, I swap weapons, I'm going to get the buff. Now, let's move over to the key gear and gear piece bonuses. So for your key gear, ideally, you'd have the Seasoned Hunter leather boots, which are pretty much all the Huntsman boost after you craft them, but these will be the best. And your second option would be Earthly boots. All the Huntsman boots are pretty much Earthly boots, as almost the same effect of Earthly boots is within Huntsman boots. However, Huntsman has the added bonus, which makes it so that every time you trigger bullseye effect, your next shot will always be considered a weak spot hit, no matter what, which is great for PvE and for PvP, as that allows you to aim for center of mass more comfortably, knowing that you aren't losing anything. Though do keep in mind that the shotgun loses almost all of its bullseye trigger chance if you are standing further than 5 meters. But even then, the Seasoned Hunter leather boots are going to be best. Then, let's talk about your gear set bonuses. So for PvE, go with either 4-piece Lone Wolf with 1-piece Bastille, or you could opt for 3-piece Renegade with 2-piece Bastille. So there are a few differences between these two sets. The first one is that Lone Wolf has higher damage ceiling, but needs more time to be stacked. And the uptime can be questionable if you don't constantly shoot and proc the 3-piece bonus, which is the getting 1 stack of Lone Shadow with every 2 weapon crit hits, and it stacks up to 8 times, lasting for 30 seconds each. Now, Lone Wolf is also more beneficial if you run Earthly Boots, and that is because Lone Wolf is crit, Renegade is weak spot. If you can just read it right here, Renegade 3-piece grants weak spot damage stacking up to 10 stacks. So you will sometimes not hit weak spots, and also if you're further than 5 meters, the old Huntsman Boots effect might not just won't trigger, right? Since you only have 30% chance to trigger the Bullseye effect from that range. And so because Lone Wolf is a crit gear, you will still benefit from its buff, whereas if you ran Renegade, you wouldn't. Now that is assuming that you are shooting at a non-weak spot area. However, for the Renegade piece, it is much faster to stack if you are constantly shooting at the same target, which is ideally a high HP target. And the reason for that is that stacks can be lost easily if you constantly change targets. And the reason for that is because Archer's focus stacks are halved when the target is changed. But now, Renegade has also more synergy if you decide to make use of your Bingo as sub-DPS or just your other half of your DPS. And lastly, Renegade has a slightly lower damage ceiling than the Lone Wolf. Now, for PvP, the first combo you can go would be 3-piece Savior with 2-piece Renegade or 4-piece Savior with 1-piece Renegade. It does then whatever. The second one would be 3-piece Bastille and 2-piece Renegade. So now let's start by talking about the Savior set first. If you go one of Savior set's options, then you're going to be playing a more aggressive. It's pretty much a set where you fight up front. And for the Bastille set, though it does kind of deviate a little bit from this video because it's less about the Doombringer, but I just still wanted to put this out since we're also talking about the Bingo. But yeah, if you go Bastille 3-piece, you are more going to be like a sniper that stays back, and you wouldn't really use this set if you're fighting up front. So you're going to gain more from this the more you use the Bingo, and one big reason for this is because 3-piece Bastille requires you to sit down like a damn turtle, which obviously you're never going to do in close range PvP. And keep in mind that the 3-piece bonus effect says that it requires you to crouch for 0.5 seconds, which believe me, 0.5 seconds is a really long time for the buff to come in once you're actually fighting people. So that pretty much explains the key differences. I hope I explained it well so that you can make a decision based on your own preferences. With the gear piece bonuses over to the side, let's dive into the substats that you're going to want to run. Well, speaking of subs, if you've been enjoying my content and would like to see more of it, don't hesitate to subscribe to my channel and like this video to support me. So anyway, before I go into the details, if you're running 3-piece Renegade and 2-piece Bastille, then 16.8% magazine capacity is what you'll need to bring the ammo count to 4. If you run 3-piece Lone Wolf or 4-piece Lone Wolf with something else, then only 12% will be needed. So for your weapon and mask, get yourself the Bullseye suffix mods. They will be the best in slot if you have something like this. One of the substats for Bullseye suffix mods is Bullseye trigger chance, and I must say, it is a pretty bad substat, although if you have a good Bullseye mod with, like, say, 3 beneficial substats, and one of them is this one, it's not the end of the world. Just know that if you get it replaced by damage bonus or reload speed boost or whatever, it's going to be better. The reason for this is because bonus chance to trigger Bullseye is multiplicative of your weapon's trigger chance, which means that it's not a flat increase, and the most amount of trigger chance you can get is 12% from 2 Bullseye suffix mods, and the weapon's base trigger chance is at 80%, so you don't really need it at close range. And then when further than 5 meters, the weapon's base trigger chance is at 30%, which ends up at 33.6% if you have 12% Bullseye trigger chance from your substats. Which really, 33.6% compared to 30% chance, it's literally nothing. So your substats rolls are better spent on other things than additional Bullseye trigger chance. And as always, keep in mind that Bullseye suffix mods cannot bear the following substats: crit damage bonus, status damage bonus, weak spot damage bonus, weapon damage bonus, and elemental damage bonus. Then for gloves and pants, go with either violent, precision, or resonance. So to clear the easiest choice out of the 3, you'd go with precision if you're going to main the Doombringer and the Bingo as both your DPS sources. Then You'd run Violent or Resonance if you're more gonna main the Doombringer, and whichever one you choose will depend on their substats. Most of the time, you'll have an easier time with getting a better Violent mod, but if you want an example of a good Resonance mod you could run, it would be with the keyword Increased Crit Damage upon dealing weak spot damage, as shown on the screen. If you do end up running a Resonance mod, for the other substats from your Resonance suffix mods, look for damage bonus versus X type of enemy and reload speed boost. Keep in mind that Resonance mods will never have the following substats: status damage bonus and weapon damage bonus. Then for every other gear piece, focus on Violent substats, especially if you're running the Earthly Boots / Boots on the Ground, or if you're going to use your shoddy way more than your other weapon, which is the Bingo. If you are going for a balance with other weapons, as in using the Bingo as much as your Doombringer, then get Precision suffix. For the rest of the substats for these mods, get yourself subs like weapon damage, damage bonus versus X type of enemy, and reload speed boost. Now, before we dive into the mods that you can / want to run, I just want to quickly say that if you see the mods I am currently running don't match the best in slots I recommend, it's simply because my alternatives are better than the best in slots due to substats. So for the weapon, it is going to be Vulnerability Amplifier. It's going to boost your damage whether you're in PvP or PvE. Now, you could do something, if I come here, you could do something called Hunter's Perk for PvP, but I personally won't be going for it since damage is what I like to do, and this mod removes a big chunk of your damage. Then for your Bingo or Wildfire, it's going to be Vulnerability Amplifier as well. And for the Long Axe, the mod you have equipped does not matter, as it doesn't activate if you don't have the Long Axe out in your hands when the effect wants to come into play. So really, the mod doesn't matter here. Then for a helmet, you've got two best in slots. So your options are going to be First Move Advantage and Precise Strike. So the main idea is that you should pick First Move Advantage if you're going to focus on your shoddy damage more, and Precise Strike if you're going to both use the shotgun and Bingo as DPS source. Then, of course, you got to keep in mind that Precise Strike is slightly more beneficial in PvP, since it doesn't need the First Move Advantage condition of reloading to get its buff. It is applied to your first mag without having a timer of 2 seconds on it, although it does have the 3 seconds timer that runs out if you stop shooting after shooting once. Now, Momentum Up could be used as a weaker option if you don't have First Move Advantage or Precise Strike. Moving on to your mask, essentially both Bullseye mods, which are Most Wanted and, if we come here, and Targeted Strike. So both Bullseye mods can be best in slots, but you'd run Most Wanted if you run Bingo as sub DPS or even just your other half of DPS, and you'd run Targeted Strike if Doombringer is your main DPS. Though I have to say that Most Wanted can also be used even if Doombringer is your main DPS, if the substats of Most Wanted are far better than your Targeted Strike. And this is why I insisted on crit from your Calibration Attributes, since swapping out Targeted Strikes makes you lose the very much needed crit from this mod. Then for your gloves, I am currently running the Crit Amplifier as I main the Doombringer, but you can also opt for, well, if you're not going to pick Crit Amplifier, you can still pick Crit Boost. Just make sure to manage your crit rate and crit damage ratio. Now, if you're not going to run these two, you can always consider Weak Spot Damage Boost if you use the Bingo consistently as well, or even Weapon Damage Boost to counter diminishing return from building too much weak spot damage. But everything, essentially, when it comes to the performance of each mod, it's, as usual, it's always going to come down to your substats. Moving on to boots, Covered Advance is your general best and will be more consistent. As always, compared to your other options, it's either less conditional or provides more buffs. Moving on to top, you've got a few choices. You can choose to run Munitions Amp, Weak Spot Damage Boost, or Crit Damage Enhancement, depending on their substats. Keep in mind that Crit Damage Enhancement will be more tailored for the shotgun, and that if you're playing PvP, you'd rather have, well, if you want to have more survivability for PvP, you can always choose one of the golden mods for more survivability, right? But here from the blue mods, Weapon Munitions Amplifier will usually be the best since you're already building a lot of crit. Lastly, for your pants, we are gonna go with 3 strikes, and this is where the heavy calibration and the extra magazine capacity becomes useful, since, well, if you just read the description of this mod, for the first 3 hits after reloading, not exceeding 50% of magazine capacity, weak spot damage plus 50%. So now, because we have 4 bullets, we now benefit that buff for 2 bullets instead of 1 if you were to run lightweight, which essentially means gaining 100% weak spot damage bonus instead of 50% from this mod. Now, of course, if you want to be more tailored with a sniper, you can opt for Unstoppable as well. But, well, 3 strikes is still usable for the sniper. As a matter of fact, it's still going to depend on your substats. But do also know that Unstoppable will never benefit the shotgun. And it will also not benefit your sniper if you're shooting from within 20 meters. Now, if you're curious about my stats, here they are. So this is with first move advantage. I believe I did first move advantage with, like, for the first 2 DPS showcases, and then I swapped it to weak spot damage because I don't know why. I think probably just played a cargo somewhere in between and just forgot to reswap. But anyway, I'm too lazy to redo the test. The results are going to be pretty similar here. But then let me show you about the stats for the precise strike. It's going to look like this. Moving on to your Cradle buffs, let's start with the mandatory or always mandatory ones. We've got handgun enhancement for the 20% damage increase, then tactical combo for the weapon damage plus 25%. You'd want steady hand, right? And lone walker when you fight solo, so not in a team, and when you're fighting against monsters. And lastly, bounty hunter. After that, you are left with 3 choices. So for PvE, go with Master Tactician to deal increased damage versus Great Ones after using a tactical item. Actually, these ones are going to be choices, right? Since you've got more choices than the amount of slots that you have. Then you can choose a Deviation Master for more damage against Great Ones when your Deviation is out. You can also choose to pick up Long Range Enhancement for the 20% damage when holding snipers. So if you use Bingo at the same time. Anti-Void Shotgun to deal more damage against Super Anomalies, although currently in my server, Super Anomalies, when their shield is up, they can only receive damage from stuff like Jaws, Frost Vortex, Power Surge, right? So this is kind of useless if you only plan to use that shotgun, since the Doombringer cannot deal damage to those Super Anomalies shields. Then, for PvP, swap all of the recommendations that I've given, and swap Lone Walker out. 4. Long range enhancement, of course, with your Bingo. Then you'd want Sprint for the movement speed and running stamina cost. Sky Operation for the damage reduction and just a jump speed and gliding speed. And Advantage Barrier. So for when hitting weak spots or reloading grants a shield equal to 30% of max HP. This is going to help you for PvP. And while the shield is active, weapon damage reduction plus 15%. So this wraps up your Cradle buffs. Now for the food buffs. Let's just take a look at the Green Drinks one. You could run Stardust Raspberry Shaved Ice for an increased duration of 2 seconds for your Bullseye effect. Otherwise, for PvP, you can always go for something called Stardust Mushroom Soup for the max stamina plus 20% and stamina recovery speed plus 3%. Other than that, you could also go for the Iced Tea, which would be roll speed plus 25%, movement speed plus 20% for 2 seconds after rolling. Then for the food buffs, it's going to be Crumbly Bread if you have less weapon damage than crit damage. Otherwise, if you have more weapon damage than crit damage, then it would be Stargazy Pie. Followed by that, you have all the weaker options, which would be Mixed Fried Hot Dog, and then followed by followed by assorted canned fruits, and just all of the other options. Now, like I always say from my previous guides, do not forget the steak combo and the pan-fried fish. If I can find it, pan-fried fish right here. They're buff stack. So for the steak combo, you should go for deer meat and rabbit meat for the stamina if you plan on playing PvP. Actually, it's good for PvE as well, but I find that it's way better for PvP. And then for pan-fried fish, the food buff such as the, if I can find it, the slightly increased weak spot damage buff. This is stackable with the crit damage buff and the fire rate. So that's it for this guide. If you've enjoyed this guide or my content in general, don't hesitate to subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and to like this video to support me. And if you have any video suggestions or questions, drop them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. For now, take care, and I'll see ya in my next one.